Hello ND narrator. My name is Zakir Naik. I am 31 years old and I was born in a small village outside Varanasi, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, India, but presently in Washington, D.C. My conversion testimony will not be complete without starting from where it all started. Life in my village was very simple but also very hard. We lived in a mud house with a tin roof that leaked during the rainy season. My father worked as a laborer, carrying bricks at construction sites, and my mother sold vegetables by the roadside to help feed us. I was the first son in the family and I had two younger sisters who looked up to me. From childhood, I knew we were poor because everything around me reminded me of what we didn't have. Other children in the city wore good clothes and carried school bags, but I often went to school barefoot with torn shirts. Yet deep inside me, I always felt that life was more than what I was seeing. When I was very young, maybe around 8 or 9 years old, I started to dream about a bigger life. Every time I walked to school on the dusty road, I would look at the buses going to the city and imagine myself sitting inside as an important man. I told myself that one day I would leave the village and go somewhere far away. I didn't know how it would happen, but the thought never left me. At night, when I lay on the mat beside my sisters, I closed my eyes and pictured myself speaking in front of many people, wearing good clothes and being respected by society. I had no clear plan, but I had a dream that one day I would rise above the poverty I was born into. Sometimes I shared these dreams with my parents, and while they smiled at me, I could also see the sadness in their eyes. My parents were good people and they wanted me to succeed, but they had no way to help me. My father had no education, so his only work was hard labor, and his pay was barely enough to feed the family. My mother was busy trying to stretch every rupee to cover food, oil, and school fees. They believed in my dreams, but they couldn't provide what I needed. Many times my father told me, "Zakir, study well and maybe one day you will escape this life." But then he would sigh because he knew that even basic things like books, uniforms, and tuition fees were hard for us to afford. Despite that, they always encouraged me to hope. I loved them deeply, but I knew the reality: we were trapped in poverty, and unless something unusual happened, I might never reach those big dreams I carried in my heart. By the time I reached my teenage years, the truth of our situation became clearer. I wanted to continue school, but the expenses were too heavy for my parents. Many times, I was sent back home because I didn't pay fees on time. I watched my classmates moving forward while I struggled to keep up. My father began to tell me gently that maybe I should stop school and think about working to support the family. That thought broke my heart because I had imagined education as my way out. Still, I understood the pressure at home. My younger sisters needed food and clothing, and I was the eldest son. At the age of 14, I began to feel the burden of responsibility pressing down on me. I stopped dreaming of becoming educated and started preparing myself to work. It felt like my future was being cut short before it even began. When I finally left school, I felt both shame and sadness. I loved learning and I was always among the top students in my class, but now all that was gone. I began to spend my days helping my father with small jobs around construction sites, carrying tools and fetching water for workers. It was heavy work for a boy my age, but I had no choice. In the evenings, I sometimes sat outside the small temple near our home, listening to the priests sing and chant. My Hindu faith became one of the few things that gave me comfort. I thought that maybe the gods had chosen this life for me and I needed to accept it. Yet, deep down, the dream of escaping my situation did not die completely. It was like a small flame burning quietly in my heart, refusing to go out no matter how much life tried to crush it. By the time I turned 16, I had already accepted that school was behind me, and now survival was the main goal. The motorcycle became my tool for earning money, and though I was still young, I learned quickly how to balance the weight of passengers and handle the rough roads around Varanasi. People in the village and nearby markets began to recognize me as one of the boys who gave rides for a small fee. Some days were good when I carried many people, and other days were slow, especially when rain poured and flooded the streets. I did not mind the danger or the long hours because I had no other option. My earnings were not much, but they helped my mother buy vegetables, and sometimes I even managed to pay for my sister's school books. That gave me a little satisfaction, though inside I wished for something bigger. Life as a motorcycle driver was filled with challenges. The roads were narrow and traffic in the city was always chaotic, with buses, bicycles, rickshaws, and cows moving in every direction. Many times I returned home with bruises from small accidents, but I kept working. I usually started early in the morning and rode until evening, trying to pick up as many passengers as I could. Sometimes people argued about the fare and refused to pay full price, but I couldn't fight back. I had to swallow my pride, take what they gave me, and move on. My body grew tired quickly, and there were nights when I fell asleep with my clothes still dirty from the road. I was young, but poverty forced me to live like an older man, already worn out by responsibility. Still, the motorcycle gave me my first taste of independence. I was no longer just helping my father at construction sites. I was now earning money directly with my own work. I started to manage small savings, though they were never enough to plan for education or any big investment. My parents were proud that I was contributing, but at the same time, they worried about my safety on the road. My mother often told me to be careful, reminding me that one accident could end everything. I nodded to comfort her, but I knew I had no choice but to continue. I dreamed of owning a bigger vehicle one day, maybe even a bus, but at that time, it felt like only a dream. At 17, I began to notice the limits of motorcycle driving. I could only carry 1 or 2 passengers at a time, and my income depended on luck and weather. Some days, after paying for fuel and repairs, I was left with very little. My father suggested that I should think of learning how to drive a bigger vehicle, but it seemed impossible then. I kept pushing on even though I knew this work had no future. Poverty had a way of pressing down hope until you almost forgot it existed. By 18, my hands were rough from holding the handlebars all day, and my back ached like an old man's. Still, I woke up every morning, tied a scarf around my head, and went back to the road, telling myself that I had to endure for the sake of my family. When I turned 19, an opportunity came that changed my path. A neighbor who worked with the local bus company told me there was a chance to become a helper, someone who collects fares and assists passengers. I accepted immediately, knowing it might open doors. I spent months working as a conductor, standing in crowded buses, shouting destinations, and collecting coins from passengers. The work was exhausting, but I learned how the system worked. I studied how the drivers handled the big buses, how they controlled the wheel through tight corners, and how they managed passengers in noisy conditions. Slowly, I began to dream again, not of education this time, but of becoming a bus driver. It felt like a step forward compared to the motorcycle, a chance to escape the endless small earnings. At 20, my dream came true when one of the older drivers allowed me to try driving under his supervision. I was nervous at first, but my experience with motorcycles gave me confidence on the road. After weeks of practice, I finally got my license, and I began to work as a full-time bus driver in Varanasi. Driving a bus was a completely different world. The vehicle was huge, heavy, and filled with passengers relying on me for their safety. Every day, I carried dozens of people to the city, to markets, to temples, and to schools. The pay was better than motorcycles, and for the first time in years, I felt like my life was moving forward. My father congratulated me, and my mother offered prayers at the temple, thanking the gods for blessing me with a bigger opportunity. But with the new job came new pressures. Driving a public bus was not easy. The roads were more crowded than ever, and accidents were common. The owners of the buses were strict about time, and I often had to drive long hours without proper rest. The passengers were not always kind. Some shouted, some refused to pay, and some treated drivers like servants. I tried to keep calm, but deep down I was tired. I earned more money now, but the work consumed all my strength. I saw no future beyond being a driver. I looked at my hands on the wheel and wondered if this was all my life would ever be. The dreams of childhood felt far away, replaced by long days of noise, smoke, and endless routes. Slowly, I began to lose hope in the idea of a better future. Education was no longer in my mind, and the thought of leaving poverty seemed impossible. All I could do was accept my role as a bus driver and provide for my family. I told myself that maybe this was my destiny, that the gods had chosen this path for me. Every time I passed by the gates of Banaras Hindu University, I felt a sting in my heart, knowing I would never step inside as a student. I pushed the pain aside and focused on my work. My life became a cycle. Wake up early, drive the bus, eat a simple meal, return home, and sleep. Day after day, nothing changed. In this period, my Hindu faith became my main comfort. I prayed at the temple whenever I could, bowing before the idols and asking for strength. I offered incense, gave small donations, and joined in the festivals with the rest of the village. I believed that if I pleased the gods, maybe they would bless my work and keep me safe on the dangerous roads. My family also depended heavily on rituals and traditions, so I continued them with devotion. Religion gave me peace, but it did not answer the emptiness inside. I still felt trapped, working hard but never moving closer to the dreams that once filled my heart. Poverty had taken away my hope, and religion was the only thing I held onto for comfort. By the time I settled fully into my role as a bus driver, my focus was only on three things: my family, my Hindu worship, and my survival. I sent money home to my parents, took care of my sisters when I could, and tried to live as a good son. The bus became my second home, and the roads of Varanasi were my daily world. I no longer asked questions about the future because the answers seemed out of reach. I accepted that life was about hard work, devotion to the gods, and responsibility to family. That was the way things were, and I thought they would never change. Looking back now, I realized this was the lowest point of my hope, the moment when I had stopped believing in dreams and was only holding on to survival. Driving a bus in Varanasi had its own rhythm. Every day I left home before sunrise, collected passengers from the villages, and carried them into the city. The roads were always crowded with rickshaws, bicycles, cows, and people rushing in every direction. Inside the bus, noise was constant. Passengers argued over seats, children cried, and vendors jumped on at every stop with trays of peanuts, samosas, or tea. They shouted loudly to sell their items before the conductor pushed them out. For drivers like me, it was normal. I had grown so used to vendors that their voices became background noise. I never expected anything different. But one afternoon near Gedaulia, something unusual happened. A tall white man stepped onto my bus carrying a small bag. He did not look like a vendor or a tourist. His presence immediately stood out, and I had no idea that his words would stay with me forever. The man sat quietly for a few minutes as the bus filled up, but then he stood and held onto the overhead bar. Instead of keeping to himself, he raised his voice. Everyone turned toward him in surprise. Foreigners almost never rode buses like this, and when they did, they never spoke to passengers. But this man began talking in broken Hindi, his accent heavy and unusual. People chuckled immediately at the way his words sounded, but I could tell what he was trying to say. And as I listened, I felt something stirring inside me. He introduced himself as someone who wanted to share about God. His voice was not loud with anger, but steady and strong, as if he carried a message too important to keep silent. The bus grew quieter for a moment, curiosity pushing people to listen, even if it was only to mock him. Then he said something that shocked me. Jesus can take you from rags to riches, from zero to hero, from prison to palace. He repeated the lines slowly, emphasizing each phrase, making sure people understood. The broken Hindi and strong accent made his words sound strange, but their meaning was clear. Some passengers laughed out loud at the unusual way he spoke, clapping their hands and making jokes. Others frowned, irritated that a foreigner was speaking about his religion in India. But I could not laugh. His sentence echoed in my heart. I thought about my own life. Born poor, forced out of school, driving a bus to survive. Was it possible for me to rise, to be taken from rags to riches, as he said? My grip on the steering wheel tightened as the bus moved forward, but my attention was fixed completely on him. To explain his point, the preacher began to tell a story. There was a young man named Joseph, he said. His brothers betrayed him and sold him as a slave. Later, he was thrown into prison even though he had done nothing wrong. But God did not leave him there. God lifted him from prison and placed him in the palace of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. His words painted pictures in my mind. I imagined Joseph in the darkness of prison, then suddenly standing in the palace, dressed in fine clothes, holding authority. The preacher continued, "This same Jesus can do the same for you. He can take you from the lowest place to the highest place if you believe in him." I had heard countless stories from Hindu priests, but never had one sounded this personal. His story felt like it was meant to meet me exactly where I was in life. The passengers, however, grew restless. Some shouted at him to stop. One man yelled, "Don't bring your foreign god here." Another mocked his accent loudly, repeating his words in a childish tone. A few threatened to push him off at the next stop. The laughter grew, but the preacher stood calm. His face did not change. He simply raised his voice slightly, not to fight, but to make sure his words carried above the noise. I watched him through the mirror and noticed his eyes. He was not speaking like a man who wanted attention. He was speaking like someone who carried a burden, as if he truly believed what he was saying. And though the passengers mocked, I felt his gaze settling on me, as if he knew I was listening differently from the rest. Inside me, a battle was taking place. On one side, I heard the insults and laughter around me, telling me to dismiss this man like everyone else. On the other side, his words pierced my heart. From prison to palace. Wasn't my life like a prison already? Waking up early, driving endlessly, earning little, and watching my dreams die slowly, wasn't that its own kind of prison? And hadn't I once dreamed of escaping to a better life? As these thoughts filled me, the preacher spoke again. Jesus sees you. Jesus knows you. And Jesus can change your story, just like he changed Joseph's. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, because for the first time in years, I felt as if someone was describing my own hidden pain in front of a bus full of strangers. As the bus rattled along, the preacher gave a challenge. Tonight, he said firmly, go home and pray to Jesus. Say these words, Jesus, if you are real, show yourself to me. That is all. Nothing more. If you pray with a sincere heart, he will answer you. His voice shook slightly on the Hindi words, but his tone carried certainty. It was not the voice of someone guessing. It was the voice of someone sure. The passengers laughed again. Some repeated the prayer mockingly, turning it into a joke. One man muttered angrily that the foreigner was wasting their time. But my heart was burning inside me. The instruction was simple, too simple to ignore. Could it be that one prayer could change the direction of my life? I felt as if this man had climbed into my bus for me alone. Soon the bus approached a crowded stop, and the preacher prepared to leave. Before stepping off, he raised his hand one last time. Remember, he said, his words still colored by the accent, pray tonight. Ask Jesus to show himself. He will answer. The doors opened and he disappeared into the sea of people outside. Immediately, the bus erupted with noise. Some passengers cursed him, others laughed until their eyes watered, and a few mocked him by repeating, Jesus, show yourself, in exaggerated tones. The bus was filled with scorn, but inside me there was silence. My hands trembled slightly on the wheel. I was not laughing. I was not mocking. I was thinking. Every word he spoke still rang in my ears, louder than the voices of the crowd. I knew that I could not let this moment pass without testing it for myself. The rest of the ride felt like a blur. I stopped at stations, collected fares, and picked up new passengers, but my mind was far away. I replayed the preacher's words again and again. The passengers forgot him quickly, but I could not. His broken Hindi might have made others laugh, but for me the meaning was clear. For years I had accepted that my life would never rise beyond poverty and survival. Yet here was a stranger claiming with boldness that Jesus could change everything. The idea seemed impossible, but it also gave me hope. By the time I parked the bus that evening, my decision was made. I would do exactly what he said. That night, when I lay in my bed, I would pray to Jesus and I would wait to see if he would answer. That night, after I finished my shift and parked the bus, I walked home with a heavy heart. The preacher's words refused to leave my mind. The passengers had mocked him and laughed until their sides hurt, but for me, every sentence kept repeating itself inside my head. Pray tonight. Ask Jesus to show himself to you. The instruction sounded simple, yet it carried a weight that I could not ignore. As I ate the little food my mother had prepared, I barely tasted it. My father asked me a casual question about work and I only nodded. I could not explain what was happening inside me. For the first time in years, I felt a strange mix of nervousness and hope, as though I was standing on the edge of something new. I went to bed early, determined to do exactly what the preacher had said. When the lights were out and my family had fallen asleep, I lay on my bed wide awake. My heart was pounding as if I was about to make a life-changing decision. I had prayed before, countless times in Hindu temples, reciting mantras and offering incense. But this prayer was different. It was not about rituals, not about memorized words, not about priests. It was about me and Jesus alone. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered quietly, Jesus, if you are real, show yourself to me. I want to know you. Please reveal yourself. My words were shaky but sincere. I felt no thunder, no sudden miracle in that moment. The room was silent, my breathing was steady, and after a while my eyes grew heavy. Without knowing it, I drifted into sleep, carrying those words in my heart. Suddenly, I felt someone touch me. I opened my eyes in the dream, and there he was, a man clothed in white, standing beside my bed. His face shone with peace, and though I had never seen him before, I knew instantly that this was Jesus. His presence filled the room with light so pure that I felt both fear and comfort at the same time. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to see through my soul, and then he spoke gently, "Zakir, get up. I want to show you something." My body rose effortlessly, though I was not sure if it was my body or my spirit. All I knew was that I followed him without question. The dream was so real that it felt more alive than waking life itself. He led me outside, and before I could even recognize where I was, everything around me changed. In an instant, I stood before a massive white castle, shining under the glow of the moon. Its walls were tall and majestic, built with beauty I had never seen in India. The doors were wide and golden, and light poured out of every window as though the building itself was alive. Jesus looked at me and said, "All this can be yours if you give your life to me." My heart trembled. A poor bus driver like me standing in front of a castle? It was unthinkable. I reached out to touch the walls, and they felt solid, real, and powerful. I could not understand how such a place could belong to someone like me, yet his words carried authority that made it believable. From the castle, we moved in an instant to another place. Now I stood before the grand gates of one of India's best universities. I had seen such places only in photographs or on television. The gate was tall, marked with symbols of learning and knowledge, and students in neat clothes walked inside with books in their hands. Jesus pointed at the gate and said, "You dreamed of education, but poverty closed the door. I can open it again. This can be yours if you follow me." My eyes filled with tears. I remembered my childhood dreams of becoming educated, dreams I buried when I was forced to leave school and work for my family. To see this vision was like seeing hope restored. My heart ached with longing, and I realized Jesus was offering me back the future I thought was lost forever. The vision changed again. I found myself walking through a rich neighborhood, unlike anything I had ever experienced. Tall buildings surrounded me, streets were clean, and beautiful houses lined the road. Expensive cars moved smoothly along wide paths, and people walked with confidence, dressed in fine clothes. It was the complete opposite of the dusty, crowded streets of my village. Jesus walked beside me and said, "These blessings are not beyond you. I can raise you to live among those who are considered great, if you trust me." His words pierced me deeply. I had grown used to believing that wealth and comfort belonged only to others, not to someone like me. Yet here he was, telling me that I too could have such a life, not because of luck or family background, but because of him. Then the most powerful vision appeared. Suddenly, the world around me dissolved, and I stood before a place so glorious that words cannot fully describe it. The sky was filled with light brighter than the sun but gentle to the eyes. The ground sparkled like gold, and in the distance, I saw gates made of pearls, opening into a city filled with indescribable beauty. Angels moved gracefully, their voices like music in the air. And at the center, I felt the presence of heaven itself. Jesus turned to me and said, "After you inherit the world, this too will be yours. If you give your life to me, you will also inherit eternal life in heaven." My whole being trembled. To see heaven with my own eyes was overwhelming. I fell to my knees in awe, unable to speak, overwhelmed by his promise. As I knelt, tears streamed down my face. I thought of my poor background, my struggles, my hopelessness, and now this, visions of a castle, a university, a rich neighborhood, and finally heaven itself. It was too much for my mind to grasp. Yet in that dream, everything felt real and alive, more real than my daily life of dust and sweat. Jesus placed his hand gently on my shoulder and said, "Zakir, I have chosen you. If you give me your heart, I will lift you from the ground to heights you never imagined. You will not only gain a future in this world but also eternal life with me." His voice was soft but carried authority that shook my spirit. I felt as though I was being given a choice that would define my entire life. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, everything began to fade. The brightness dimmed, the voices of angels faded, and I felt myself falling backward into darkness. Then suddenly I opened my eyes. I was back in my small room, lying on the bed where I had started. My heart was racing, my clothes damp with sweat, and tears still wet on my cheeks. I sat up quickly, my body trembling from the power of what I had just seen. It was not like any ordinary dream. It was alive, sharp, and unforgettable. I knew without any doubt that Jesus had visited me. He had shown me visions of what could be mine, and I knew exactly what he was asking of me. The room was quiet, but my spirit was not. I whispered, "Thank you, Jesus. I know you are real now." My whole being was filled with joy, a joy I had never felt before. The hopelessness that had weighed me down for years felt lighter, as though chains had broken inside me. I lay back on my bed, smiling through my tears, and felt peace wrap around me like a blanket. For the first time in my life, I knew I had found the answer to my struggles, the answer I had searched for since childhood. I had prayed the simple prayer, and Jesus had shown himself to me. That night marked the beginning of a new journey, one that would take me far beyond anything I had ever dreamed as a poor boy from Varanasi. When I woke up the next morning, the memory of the dream was still fresh in my mind. Normally dreams fade quickly, but this one refused to leave me. I could still see the white castle, the university gates, the rich neighborhood, and heaven itself. I could still feel the hand of Jesus on my shoulder and hear his words echoing in my heart. It was impossible to treat it as a simple dream. I knew beyond doubt that it was real, that I had been shown something divine. I sat up in bed, smiling to myself, filled with a happiness I had never felt before. My parents were surprised to see me in such a good mood. My mother asked if something special had happened, but I only told her that I had slept well. Deep inside, I knew I had found something too precious to explain yet. All through breakfast, I thought only of the preacher. He had been the one who told me to pray, the one who promised Jesus would answer. And now it had happened exactly as he said. I could not let the moment pass without telling him. I wanted to find him, to thank him, and to tell him what I had seen. More than that, I felt he would know what I should do next. The dream had shown me so much, but I needed guidance to understand it. I left home quickly, barely finishing my food, and walked straight to the bus stop where he had stepped off the day before. My heart beat fast as I looked around, searching the faces in the crowd, hoping I might see him again. Even if I had to wait the entire day, I was ready. The bus stop was crowded, filled with vendors selling tea and snacks, rickshaw drivers calling out to passengers, and people rushing in every direction. I stood still, scanning the area for the tall white man. I asked the chai seller if he had seen the foreigner who had been preaching on the bus yesterday. The man laughed and said, "Yes, we all noticed him. A white man speaking in broken Hindi is not something you see every day." He pointed toward a narrow lane and told me the preacher had walked in that direction. Encouraged, I began asking others nearby, and each time the instructions grew clearer. "Go down the lane, turn near the small temple, and you will find where he stays," one said. It amazed me how easy it was to trace him. In a city filled with millions of people, a foreign preacher stood out like a lamp in the dark. I followed the directions until I reached a modest building. It was nothing impressive, just a small apartment block with peeling paint and clothes hanging from balconies. I hesitated for a moment, nervous about what I might find. But the memory of my dream gave me courage. I climbed the stairs and knocked on a wooden door. After a short moment, the door opened, and there he was, the same tall man from the bus, dressed simply, his face calm and welcoming. He looked surprised to see me but smiled warmly. "Yes, can I help you?" he asked in English this time, his Hindi accent missing. I introduced myself quickly and told him I was the bus driver from yesterday. His eyes lit up with recognition and he stepped aside, inviting me in. My heart raced as I entered his small apartment. Inside the room was plain. A simple bed, a table with a Bible on it, and a few chairs filled the space. The smell of tea lingered in the air. I sat down nervously, unsure how to begin. He looked at me kindly, waiting for me to speak. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "Sir, yesterday you told us to pray to Jesus, to ask him to show himself. I did exactly that. Last night, Jesus came to me in a dream." His expression grew serious, and he leaned forward as I began to tell him everything. I described how Jesus woke me up, how he led me to the White Castle, the university gates, the rich neighborhood, and finally heaven itself. I repeated every detail I could remember, even the words Jesus spoke to me. As I spoke, tears filled my eyes and my voice shook with emotion. When I finished, the room fell silent. The preacher's eyes were wet too, and he bowed his head for a moment as though thanking God. Then he looked up at me and said softly, "I came to India because the Holy Spirit sent me here." I did not understand fully why. I asked God many times, "Why are you sending me so far to a place where people may not even understand me?" And God told me, "I am sending you for one person. When you meet him, you will know." His voice broke slightly as he continued, "Now I know why I am here. That one person is you, Zakir." My body trembled as he said those words. I felt a wave of awe wash over me. Out of all the millions in the city, God had brought this man here just for me. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Me? I asked, pointing to myself as though he might have been mistaken. Yes, he said firmly. You are the one. Jesus chose you. He answered your prayer because he has a plan for you. I sat in silence, my heart overwhelmed. For so long, I had believed my life was small, trapped by poverty and hopelessness. And now, here was a man who had come from across the world, sent by the Spirit of God, saying that I was the reason for his journey. Tears streamed down my face again, but this time they were tears of joy. I knew without doubt that my life was changing. Jesus had found me, and this preacher had confirmed it. I was no longer lost. I was chosen. The preacher reached for his Bible and opened it. He began to read verses about how God chooses the weak to shame the strong, how he lifts the poor from the dust and seats them with princes. Every word felt like it was written for me personally. I listened with all my heart, nodding and wiping away tears. He then placed his hand on my shoulder and prayed aloud, thanking God for bringing me into his life. I felt a warmth spread through me as he prayed, the same warmth I had felt in my dream when Jesus touched me. When he finished, he looked at me and said, Zakir, this is only the beginning. God has much more in store for you. He will take you from where you are to where he wants you to be, if you keep following him. I told him about my life, how I had grown up poor, how I was forced to leave school, how I had been driving buses just to survive. I confessed that I had given up hope of ever having a future beyond that. He listened patiently, nodding with understanding, and then said, That is why Jesus came to you. He knows your pain. He knows your dreams. And he wants to lift you out of the life that has trapped you. His words were gentle but powerful. For the first time, I felt my story was not just a sad tale but a testimony that God wanted to transform. Everything about my past, the struggles, the poverty, the disappointment, was leading me to this moment, to this meeting. I felt as though my whole life had been planned for this encounter. As I left his apartment that day, my heart was lighter than ever before. The streets looked the same, the noise of Varanasi was unchanged, but inside me, everything was different. I walked with confidence, knowing that Jesus had not only revealed himself to me but had also confirmed his choice through this preacher. I was no longer wandering without direction. I knew now that my life had a purpose, and I was ready to follow wherever Jesus would lead me. That night, as I lay on my bed again, I whispered a simple prayer of thanks. Jesus, thank you for finding me. Thank you for sending that man here for me. I am ready to give you my life. With that, I closed my eyes, filled with peace, and drifted into sleep with a joy deeper than anything I had ever known. The weeks after meeting the preacher were filled with both excitement and uncertainty. Almost every evening I visited his apartment after finishing work. He became more than a mentor. He was like an elder brother guiding me step by step. We drank tea together, read from the Bible, and talked about life. He encouraged me that Jesus not only saves the soul but also rebuilds broken lives. One evening, as we sat at his small wooden table, he looked at me seriously and said, Zakir, Jesus has given you a future. You cannot remain in the same place. You must grow in knowledge if you are to serve him fully. His words shook me. Education had always been my buried dream, the one I thought was lost forever. I lowered my head and told him how poverty forced me out of school. He listened quietly, then smiled and said, God is not finished. At first, I thought he was speaking out of kindness, but his determination was clear. He began making calls, contacting churches, and even writing letters to friends abroad. He explained that God had sent him to India for me, and that his work was not just to preach but to prepare me for something greater. Soon he told me he would take me to America. My heart jumped, half with joy and half with fear. The thought of traveling so far away seemed impossible for someone like me. Yet he assured me, if God has chosen you, no door will remain closed. With his help, I began the long process of applying for a passport and visa. The paperwork was heavy, the government offices crowded, and the language confusing, but the preacher guided me step by step. Each time I felt like giving up, he reminded me that this was part of God's plan. Months later, when I finally held the visa in my hand, I stared at it in disbelief. My family was stunned. My mother cried when she saw the stamp, and my father said softly, Son, your life is greater than we imagined. On the day of departure, I hugged them tightly, promising I would not forget them. My mother placed a thread around my wrist for protection, according to her Hindu faith, but I knew now my protection was in Jesus. The preacher traveled with me, guiding me through the airport and calming my nervous heart. As the plane took off from Delhi, I looked out of the window at the fading lights of my homeland and whispered a prayer. Lord Jesus, I trust you. Lead me where you want. The journey was long, but when we landed in Washington, D.C., I knew my life had entered a completely new chapter. America was overwhelming. The tall buildings, the wide, clean roads, the endless cars, and the fast-speaking people. It was like stepping into another world. I felt both amazed and small. The preacher took me to a Methodist church community in Washington, where I was welcomed warmly. They were kind people, always smiling, though I struggled to understand their fast English. I could not believe how openly they spoke about Jesus, prayed in public, and worshipped with music that filled the air. For someone who grew up hiding doubts and questions, it felt like a new kind of freedom. The preacher introduced me to a group of believers who immediately treated me like family. They listened to my story with tears in their eyes and told me I was a living example of God's grace. Slowly, my fear began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that I was in the right place. But there was still a challenge ahead. Though I was now in America, I had not studied properly for years. My English was weak, my writing almost non-existent, and my knowledge of basic subjects far behind. I wanted to learn, but I knew I could not simply enter a university classroom and expect to succeed. The Methodist leaders who welcomed me understood this. After prayer and discussion, they arranged for a private teacher to help me. She was a kind woman named Margaret, a retired schoolteacher who loved helping young students. For 2 years, I sat in her small study room, relearning the basics of reading, writing, arithmetic, and English grammar. She was patient with me, correcting my mistakes gently, encouraging me when I grew frustrated, and pushing me when I grew lazy. Many nights, I stayed awake practicing sentences and memorizing words, determined not to waste the opportunity given to me. Those 2 years were not easy, but they were precious. Slowly, I began to read the Bible in English with better understanding. I could write essays, answer questions, and even hold conversations without fear. Each improvement felt like a small miracle. Sometimes I remembered the vision of the university gates that Jesus showed me in the dream. I realized he had not lied. He was preparing me step by step to walk through those gates. By the end of the second year, Margaret believed I was ready for formal education. With her encouragement, I took the basic examination tests required for further study. I prayed hard before entering the exam hall, asking Jesus to help me. When the results came back, I had passed. It was not perfect, but it was enough to open the door for the next stage. My joy overflowed as I knelt to thank God for his faithfulness. The Methodist leaders and the preacher celebrated with me. They knew my heart was not only for education but for serving Christ. They told me about Wesley Theological Seminary, a respected institution in Washington, D.C., where students prepared for ministry and academic roles in the church. The preacher said, "Zakir, this is the place for you. You must go there, for God is calling you not just to learn but to teach others one day." The thought filled me with awe. To go from being a bus driver in India to studying in a seminary in America, it felt like a story only God could write. With their support, I submitted my application, explaining my journey of faith and my desire to serve. When the acceptance letter arrived, I held it with trembling hands. I remembered the promise of Jesus, "If you give me your life, you will inherit both the world and heaven." At 24 years old, I began my formal studies at Wesley Theological Seminary. The first day I walked through its gates, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I remembered standing in my dream at the gate of a great university. Now, it was no longer a dream, it was reality. The campus was filled with students from many countries, carrying books and engaging in deep discussions. At first, I felt out of place, worried that my background was too humble and my knowledge too small. But each lecture, each reading, and each prayer session reminded me that I was exactly where God wanted me to be. I studied theology, history, and ministry with seriousness, knowing this was not just for myself but for the calling God had placed on my life. Slowly, I gained confidence and began to see myself not only as a student but as a future servant of the church. Life in America changed me in every way. I learned to balance studies with church service, often helping the Methodist community with small tasks while continuing my education. Each Sunday, I stood among believers, singing hymns in English and sometimes in Hindi when they asked me to share. They encouraged me to tell my story, and each time I spoke, I saw eyes widen with amazement and hearts touched with hope. I realized my testimony was not mine alone. It was a gift God wanted me to share. The poor boy from Varanasi had been lifted to Washington, D.C., not by luck, but by the grace of Jesus. Every time I walked into a classroom, I carried that truth with me. I was not here because of my ability, but because of God's purpose. That knowledge gave me courage to keep going, no matter how hard the journey became. Now, as I look back, I see how perfectly Jesus led me. From the day I prayed in my small room in India, to the dream that showed me my future, to meeting the preacher, to stepping into America, every step was guided by his hand. The years of private teaching prepared me for formal education. The exams opened the door to seminary. And the seminary itself became the place where my calling grew clearer. I had once been hopeless, thinking my life would end in poverty and obscurity. But now I was being trained for something far greater. My journey was no longer about survival, it was about purpose. I knew my life was being prepared for ministry, for sharing the same message that had changed me, that Jesus takes people from the lowest places and lifts them to heights they never imagined. Now I am 31 years old, walking daily on the grounds of Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. When I first arrived here as a student, I felt both small and unworthy. I looked around and saw young men and women from strong Christian families, many of them with years of education behind them. At times, I thought to myself, how can a poor boy from Varanasi stand among them? But whenever those thoughts came, I remembered the dream Jesus gave me. He had shown me the gate of a great university and promised that if I gave him my life, he would give me both this world and heaven. Each time I entered the seminary gate, I smiled to myself because I know Jesus has kept his promise. My journey has not been because of talent or money, but because of his grace. My days at the seminary are full of learning and growth. I attend lectures on theology, ministry, and church history. I sit in classrooms where great discussions take place about how to teach, how to serve, and how to reach souls with the message of Christ. At first, the English was heavy for me, but I worked harder, reading late at night and asking teachers for help. Slowly, I improved. Some of my classmates were surprised when I told them about my background, how I once drove buses in India. They found it difficult to believe, but I explained to them that Jesus lifts the lowly. The seminary professors also encouraged me greatly. They often said, "Zakir, your story will inspire many." Their words gave me more strength to keep pushing. I knew I was not here to compete, but to prepare for the ministry God had already planned for me. The Methodist community in Washington became my family. They gave me more than books and classes. They gave me opportunities to serve. On weekends, I visited small congregations speaking about my faith journey. My Hindi accent still showed in my English, but people listened with open hearts. Many times, tears filled the eyes of listeners as I told them how Jesus met me in a dream and lifted me from hopelessness. I understood then that my story was not mine to keep. It was meant to encourage others who thought their lives were broken beyond repair. Standing in front of people, telling them about Jesus, I realized that ministry is not only about knowledge but also about testimony. God uses our lives as messages. I was once ashamed of my poor background, but now I saw it as a tool in the hands of Christ to reach others. Each day at the seminary, I learn not only from books but from life itself. The diversity of people amazes me. There are students from Africa, Latin America, Asia, and America itself. All of us come with different stories, but we meet at one point, Jesus. In conversations, I often share with my friends how different my life was in India. I tell them about my days as a Hindu boy, bowing before idols, burning incense, and reciting chants. I tell them about my hopelessness when I thought I would never escape poverty. Then I tell them about that American preacher who entered my bus and preached about Jesus taking people from prison to palace, from zero to hero. They are always surprised, and sometimes they laugh, saying, "Only God could arrange such a story." I agree. Only God could write a journey like mine, from the streets of Varanasi to the classrooms of Washington. My preparation for ministry is serious. The seminary requires us to practice preaching, counseling, and teaching. At first, I was nervous to stand before others and preach. My English was not polished, and I worried about making mistakes. But I remembered how Moses told God he could not speak well, and yet God used him. I said to myself, if God can use Moses, he can use me. Slowly, my confidence grew. The first time I delivered a sermon in class, my voice shook, but my heart was strong. I preached from the story of Joseph, the same story the preacher once told in my bus in India. When I finished, my classmates clapped and my teacher said, "Zakir, that message came from your life and it carried power." In that moment, I knew clearly that ministry was not about perfection of speech but about the reality of God's power in a life. Many nights, I stay awake thinking about where God is leading me. I dream of returning to India one day, not as the poor bus driver I once was, but as a servant of Christ bringing the gospel to those who are lost like I once was. I pray for my family still in Varanasi, asking God to open their hearts. I write letters to them speaking about life in America, though I have not yet fully shared everything about my faith. I wait for the right time. Until then, I prepare myself with knowledge and faith, knowing the day will come when I will stand before my people and speak boldly about Jesus. Will not be easy. I know persecution may come, but I also know the promise Jesus gave me. After you inherit the world, you will also inherit heaven. That promise is enough to keep me moving forward. Looking back, the distance I have traveled is almost unbelievable. I remember my childhood in Varanasi, where hunger was common and dreams were far away. I remember riding motorcycles at 16 and driving buses at 20, thinking that was my life forever. I remember bowing before idols, believing they could save me while my heart remained empty. I remember the day the American preacher stepped into my bus, mocked by many but heard by me. I remember the night I prayed and dreamed of Jesus showing me castles, universities, riches, and heaven. I remember the search for the preacher, the meeting in his apartment, and his words that God had sent him for me. I remember the long journey to America, the private teacher, the exams, and finally the seminary. From trenches to Washington, from poverty to purpose, my story is proof of God's grace. Now, as I live each day in Washington, I hold tightly to one truth. Jesus changes lives completely. He does not only forgive sins, he rebuilds destinies. I was once lost in idol worship, chained by hopelessness and buried in poverty. Today, I am preparing to be a Methodist minister, ready to serve others with the gospel of Christ. This is not because of my strength but because of his mercy. Whenever I stand in the seminary chapel and sing with other students, I feel heaven touching earth. Whenever I kneel in prayer, I remember the poor boy I once was and the man I am becoming in Christ. Truly this is grace. Truly, this is what it means to be taken from grass to grace. And as I prepare for ministry, I carry one message that I want the world to hear. That message is simple but powerful. Jesus is alive and he is able to transform any life. If he could take me, a Hindu bus driver with no education, and make me a student in Washington, he can do the same for anyone. If he could lift me from hopelessness to purpose, he can lift you too. I want everyone who hears my story to know that Jesus is not limited by culture, by religion, or by poverty. He is Lord over all, and his invitation is open to all. I have no regrets in leaving behind idols and false hopes. I have no shame in following Jesus, even if the world mocks me. I have found the truth and the truth has set me free. From Hindi worship to Christ, from Varanasi to Washington, from trenches to ministry, my life is proof that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. As I bring this part of my journey to a close, I want to leave a word of encouragement. Do not think your life is too broken for God to fix. Do not believe your past is too heavy for God to forgive. Do not accept the lie that your future is already lost. I once believed all those lies, but Jesus proved them wrong. He showed me that with him, nothing is impossible. My name is Zakir Naik, and I am no longer the boy who once bowed before idols and drove buses with no hope. I am a follower of Christ, preparing to serve as a minister in the Methodist Church. My life is living evidence that when you give your heart to Jesus, he will take you from grass to grace. And that grace will carry you not only through this world but into heaven itself. I think often of my people in India, the millions who bow daily before idols, burning incense, chanting words, and searching for peace that never comes. I was once one of them, blinded by tradition, bound by rituals, and trapped in hopelessness. But Jesus came to me in a dream and changed everything. I cannot rest knowing that so many are still waiting for that same light. My heart cries for them daily, and I ask every believer who hears my story to pray for India. Pray that the same Jesus who lifted me will open the eyes of my brothers and sisters across the land. India is a nation of colors, temples, festivals, and endless gods. But behind the music and rituals are empty hearts longing for truth. I know this because I lived it. I stood in front of idols made of stone and wood, hoping they could hear me, but they never did. I lit lamps in temples, but no light entered my soul. My people are sincere, but sincerity without truth only leads to despair. That is why I beg for your prayers. Pray that the Holy Spirit will sweep across India, breaking chains of idolatry and opening hearts to Jesus. Pray for the young boys and girls who are like I once was, poor and hopeless, thinking education and dreams are beyond their reach. Pray that they will know Jesus is able to lift them up. I also carry a personal burden that weighs heavily on me every day. My parents are still alive in Varanasi. They are old now, their faces lined with years of hard work and sacrifice. They raised me with love, even when poverty forced them to hold me back from education. I honor them for all they did, but I long for something greater for them. I long for them to know Jesus before they die. My mother still lights incense in front of the idols, whispering prayers to gods who cannot hear. My father still attends temple ceremonies, bowing before priests who offer no salvation. Each time I think of their devotion, my heart aches, because I know they are seeking comfort in shadows. I do not want them to leave this world without knowing the true light. I pray daily for my parents, sometimes with tears in my eyes. I kneel beside my bed and cry out to God, Lord, open their hearts. Reveal yourself to them as you revealed yourself to me. But I know my prayers alone are not enough. That is why I ask you, my brothers and sisters in Christ, to join me. Pray for my father and my mother. Pray that before they take their last breath, they will see Jesus. Pray that they will be freed from idols and find peace in the one true Savior. I believe with all my heart that God is able to reach them. I have seen Him do impossible things in my life, and I trust He can do the same for them. Sometimes I dream of the day I will return to India, not as the bus driver I once was, but as a servant of Christ. I dream of walking into my family home, opening the Bible, and telling my parents face to face about the Jesus who saved me. I dream of them listening quietly, maybe at first with confusion, but then with open hearts. I imagine my mother placing aside the incense and lifting her hands in prayer to Christ. I imagine my father putting down the offerings to idols and kneeling to accept Jesus. Oh, what joy it would be to see them saved, not only from poverty but from eternal separation from God. Until that day comes, I keep praying and asking others to pray with me. To all who hear this testimony, I want you to know that your prayers matter. Do not think that your prayer is small or powerless. When you pray for India, heaven listens. When you pray for my family, God moves. I am a living witness that prayer changes destinies. A preacher prayed for me, a poor Hindu bus driver, and today I am preparing for ministry in Washington, D.C. That is the power of prayer. If God could answer the prayers that brought me this far, then He will surely hear the prayers for my family and for India. So, I ask you with all humility, please remember us in your prayers daily. I do not know what tomorrow holds. I do not know if I will see my family again soon. I do not know how long it will take for the gospel to spread across India. But I know this, Jesus is faithful. He has promised that His word will not return empty. He has promised that the nations will hear the good news. He has promised that every knee will bow and every tongue confess that He is Lord. I cling to those promises as I study, as I preach, and as I pray. And I invite you to cling with me, to lift India before the throne of grace, and to believe that revival will come. If you have ever doubted whether God can change a life, let my story be your answer. If you have ever wondered whether your prayers matter, let my journey prove their power. And if you have ever thought that some people are too lost to be saved, remember my parents. They are old, set in their traditions, and still bowing before idols. But I believe even now that Jesus can meet them just as He met me. Pray for them. Pray that their last days will be filled with light, not darkness. Pray that their final words will be praises to Jesus, not chants to lifeless gods. This is my deepest request, my heaviest burden, and my greatest hope. So I end my story not with pride in what I have achieved, but with a humble cry for prayer. Pray for India. Pray for my family. Pray that the same Jesus who took me from grass to grace will shine in the hearts of millions across my homeland. And if you ever remember my name, remember me not as a man who left Hinduism or a man who came to America. Remember me as a son crying for his people, longing for his parents, and trusting in Jesus. My journey is not finished, but with your prayers and God's power, I believe the best is yet to come.